Hi, everyone. Sarah Copeland Hanzas is Vermont's 39th Secretary of State, elected in November 2022. She has lived, gone to school, and worked in Vermont since 1971, and her life and career have always centered on service. She's been an educator, a youth coach, a small business owner, and a state legislator. During her 18-year legislative career, she served as majority leader, was co-chair of the Climate Solutions Caucus, and was chair of the House Government Operations Committee. Sarah served on the executive committee of the National Conference of State Legislatures. She's passionate about civics and has made civic education and engagement a major priority for her office. She lives in Bradford with her husband, John. They have 3 adult children. Please give a warm welcome to Sarah Copeland Hanzas.
All right. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and thank you for coming out on a beautiful afternoon. How's the volume? Are we good? Can you hear me okay? Okay. So this is the universal signal to me that that you're having trouble hearing me. So if I see you do this, I will get a little closer to the microphone. Okay? I'm Sarah Copeland Hanzas. I'm really proud to be here with you today. I've created a presentation that will run you through a few of the successes of the 2024 election cycle, and then we will run through some of the work of our civics division at the Secretary of State's office. Division sounds very glamorous because our civics division is standing right back there. That is Robin Palmer. She is our Education and Civic Engagement Director. Thank you for being here, Robin. Robin is a mighty team of one, but she is supported by our outreach and engagement team, who is led by Brian Mills, our Chief of Staff, who's back in the back. Thank you for being here, Brian. And both of these folks have a South Burlington connection, so it's very fitting that we're here in Robin's hometown. And so I'm going to jump right into the slides so that we leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So 2024 was my first election as Secretary of State, and needless to say, with the political climate that we're in and all of the attention that people are giving to voting and elections, we wanted to make sure that the election went off without a hitch. So we spent a lot of time in 2024 training clerks, making sure that they were given ample support in setting up the cybersecurity that they needed for their offices, the physical security that they need to consider in order to safely run an election. And we also provided them this year with de-escalation training because we've seen such a heightened rhetoric around elections that many clerks were telling us, you know, we don't know what to do when somebody comes into our office and is in our face and yelling at us. So we wanted to help prepare them so that they had the skills that they needed in order to get through any scenario. We did a lot of hand-holding with office hours and dry run on how to do the election night reporting. We have a lot of new clerks that have come into their office over the last 2 years, and we wanted to make sure that everyone knew how to get their results reported on election night. We also made sure that we did media availability the day before the presidential primary, the August primary, and the general election, because we know that the reporters who are covering local races or statewide races need to understand how elections work so that if they hear something about an election procedure, they understand whether that is part of the process or whether that is something unusual. So we spent a lot of time making sure that our media was prepared and ready to go. Collaboration with our federal, state, and local partners to make sure that Election Day was safe and secure for voters, as well as for clerks and election volunteers across the state. We made sure that voters were ready for Election Day 2024. We had over 50 voter registration events that we held across the state with the help of a couple of Civics interns over the summer, and then Robin taking the lion's share of that in the fall when our interns went back to college. We saw Vermont, we'll get to some statistics in a few minutes, but Vermont reached its highest number of registered voters this year, and some of that is due in part to the work that we did on registering voters in the summer and fall. All right. For some reason, I am now getting volume on my, okay, I have muted myself. Thank you. It's a little technical glitch. So one of the projects that Robin took by, the bull by its horns that I was most proud of this year was the online voter guide that we made available. We gave every single candidate who was on your ballot, from the top of the ticket at the presidential and gubernatorial level all the way down through to your local state rep and state senator candidates. We gave everyone the opportunity to fill out basic information that we would provide to voters, so that when you have your vote by mail ballot on your kitchen table for 3, 4, 5 weeks before the election, you can spend those weeks researching the candidates who are on your ballot. And oftentimes, with the decline in local media, it's really hard to find information about a candidate unless they're out there actively advertising or holding a lot of community events. And so we wanted to make sure that we made it as easy as possible for voters to understand who was on their ballot, so they could choose the candidate whose values most closely match their own. The online voter guide was a huge hit and a huge success, and Robin did just a tremendous amount of work making sure the candidates got their information in, and then making sure that that information was organized so that when you saw your voter guide, it was in the same order as the candidates appeared on your ballot, to make it easier for voters to go through and choose who they were voting for. So some election numbers. So 2024, we saw 372,000 votes cast, over 70% turnout for the second presidential election in a row. So 2020 was the first time we had done universal vote by mail. Of course, back then it was COVID and none of us were going anywhere. Great high turnout. We nearly met that turnout level this year in 2024, and that's something to be really proud of, because there's a lot of states around the country that don't hit 70%. Over 60% of the ballots that were cast as from those mail-in ballots, right? People were able to take advantage of the convenience of having their ballot at home, where they could think about who they wanted to vote for before they filled their ballot out. We have now over 508,000 registered voters in Vermont. And the other half of the voter registration equation, in addition to all of those registration drives that Robin and the Civics interns did over the summer and fall, we had 6,700 Vermonters use same-day voter registration. That means they hadn't been previously registered, maybe they hadn't voted in a while, or maybe they were new to their community and they needed to register. And because Vermont's law allows people to register same day, 6,700 people were able to vote who might not otherwise have been able to vote. So I think that's a major win as well. So looking ahead, what are we up to? Well, we're not sitting on our laurels, although it would be nice to be able to rest and relax for a while. But we have a major upgrade in our election management system that is being built as we speak and is scheduled to roll out in April. Our town and city clerks across the state are in the election management system right now, preparing for town meeting, preparing their voter checklist to make sure people can participate in your local government town meeting or your school budget votes. And as soon as the clerks are done and wrapped up with that town meeting period of time, we are going to get them into their new election management system. We have also already launched a new campaign finance and lobbyist disclosure system. Those both came online within the last several months. These are major upgrades to the systems that we had before. And both of these systems are really intended to provide transparency to Vermonters so that you know who is being paid to lobby the government and who and why they're doing that. What are the corporations who are hiring lobbyists and what issues are they lobbying on? You can find that in our lobbyist disclosure system. And our campaign finance system is the way that you know who is donating money in order to get candidates elected up and down the ballot. So we're really proud of the transparency that those systems offer, and the new systems are pretty sweet, and we're very excited that the systems have gone live. We are working right now on an elections bill that is in the legislature. In fact, my deputy and our elections director is probably testifying as we speak, because I was listening to the committee testimony on my way up here today. So there are a couple of issues that we are hoping the legislature will pass. Number one is an issue around reporting write-ins. So how many of you have ever volunteered for an election as a poll worker, or maybe you're a JP or a member of the Board of Civil Authority? So on election night, after the ballots have been put through the tabulator and the tabulator tape has been read, then the tedious task of logging all of the write-in results begins. And for some communities, that process can last, till 10, 11, midnight. It is a long and tedious process because each and every one of those write-ins needs to be recorded and put into the election night reporting system. Now, oftentimes what we see when we look at a batch of write-ins is we see she put her name, and she put her name, and he put his name, and he put his name. And so it's, oftentimes hundreds of one-off, I'm just going to vote for myself because pretty sure I can do a better job than any of the rest of the people who are on the ballot. That's totally valid, right? If you think you're better than the person who's running for that office, by all means, write your name in. However, the sum total of that across all of the races that are on your ballot means hours and hours of work for the people who are working the polls on election night. And so what we're going to do is we're going to ask the legislature to create a system whereby if somebody wants to become a state representative by a write-in candidacy, they can by all means do that. And they would take the step of registering for that race, at a week before the election, and just say, I want you to tally up all of my votes. And for any candidate who doesn't register, then the clerk would not have to list each individual name. They could just say, this registered write-in candidate got 14 votes, and all of these unregistered write-in candidates got 47 votes. But they wouldn't have to list each and every name when one person writes their own name in. This is going to be a huge time saver for our clerks, and we really appreciate that the legislature is taking careful consideration to moving this forward. I also want to talk about ranked choice voting. We believe that ranked choice voting for the presidential primary is a good adaptation of our election laws in Vermont. Now, why presidential primary? Well, ranked choice voting works best when you have multiple candidates for one office. So if you think back to your presidential primary ballot this past March, depending on which ballot you took, you probably saw a fairly long list of names, right? There's always multiple people who are running in that race. And sometimes there's a person on that list who you think, wow, I heard them speak, they've got some really great ideas, but then you have to stop and say to yourself, do they have a snowball's chance of winning? right? And that's a tough choice to have to make, because oftentimes we're saying to ourselves, I'd really like to vote for this person, but they don't seem to have a lot of money or name recognition or momentum, and so I feel like I have to vote for this person because this is the person who seems to have the momentum. Well, ranked choice voting allows you to look at all the candidates on your ballot and rank them in order of preference. So if there's a candidate that you're particularly passionate about, you can vote for them as your number one, and then you can pick this other candidate maybe as your number two or your number three. And when they go to count the votes, if the person with the most votes doesn't win a majority, so 50% plus one vote, then they take the second choice votes and add them on until you get to the point where you've got somebody who's come across the finish line as a majority winner. And that allows us to not only as individuals support somebody who is philosophically aligned with us and who we are passionate about, but it also allows us to know that if our top choice, maybe doesn't finish in that first round, doesn't cross the line, that our second place votes can still be counted. So we are hoping that the legislature will move ranked choice voting for the 2028 presidential primary. And you're thinking, wow, that's like 4 years, 5 years, 3 years away, 3.5. Why are we doing this now? Well, we're doing it now because ranked choice voting is a different method of voting. We need our town and city clerks to have time to understand the changes they will need to make in how they tally votes and how we bring the ballots to make sure that we can do that ranked choice calculation. And we need lots of time to educate voters because it is something that most voters in Vermont have not experienced before. And so we're hoping that the legislature will pass ranked choice voting and give us the long runway we need in order to prepare for a different way of doing our primary in 2028. So we have also been very busy earlier on this legislative session in helping the legislature think about the election implications of this major education reform bill that is being talked about in Montpelier. So the governor has proposed creating many fewer school districts, which would be geographically larger, and having those school districts have a 5-person board that would be elected from around that larger district. In the event that we do that, the fairest way to make sure that that voters in that new school district have a school board member who represents them is if we then create different voting wards within that new school district. So we've been helping the legislature think about the timeline and the steps that they would need to take in order to consolidate to fewer school districts and to figure out how to apportion wards within those school districts. So that's the 2024 recap and a little bit about what we're doing in the legislative session. And now I'd love to run you through some slides on Vermont's first ever Civic Health Index. So when I came into office, as my introduction said, I made civics a priority. Our first step was to hire a civics director. Robin Palmer has been absolutely fantastic. She has really just taken this huge, mostly unwritten job description of we need to focus on civics in Vermont, and she has figured out ways that we can make progress and to help Vermonters understand how government works and how they fit into it. One of the first things that we did is we brought together a group of teacher advisors, and together they created some civics resources that we can now distribute to teachers around the state so that teachers have a classroom guide for how to bring an elected official into the classroom, for instance, because we know that young people need to understand how government works, and what better way to do that than to have an elected official visit your classroom. So the next project that Robin started very early as Civic's director was this process of doing a civic health index. So the National Council on Citizenship, NCOC, it compiles data and has done these civic health indexes in 35, 38 different states. And we had a whole group of partner organizations who helped us really fill out and enrich that basic data that we got from NCOC. And we have on the back table the executive summary of the Civic Health Index. And there's also a QR code on the bottom of the back where you can get a link to the text of the full Civic Health Index if you'd like to read through the whole report. This really is sort of a snapshot using the data that we had available to understand how Vermonters engage with each other and what is the civic health. How does Vermont compare to other states who've also done these civic health indexes. Some of the other partner organizations are listed across the top of this slide. The Center for Rural Studies at the University of Vermont, AmeriCorps, Vermont Humanities Council, and Up for Learning. So 37th state. See, I couldn't remember what the number was. It's a good thing it's on that slide. So we have all of these partner organizations who have helped us to compile this data. With this data, we have looked at 6 different areas of civic health, or these are known as domains of civic health. And the 6 domains of civic health that we're focusing on are government trust and access, media trust and access, social and community context, cultural access and engagement, political engagement, and volunteerism and donating. It was really important to me when we set about to do this civic health index that we also understand what is the civic health of our young people. I don't know how many of you have children or grandchildren in school right now, but young people right now in the years coming out of COVID are having a really tough time. And a lot of that centers on loneliness and isolation and not feeling connected to peers and to community. And so it was really important to me that we take the time and make the investment to understand how young people feel connected to other people. Now, you folks are probably among the most civically engaged people in this entire state because you come together regularly as a group and you learn together and you share stories, and I saw lots of fun greetings as you all were coming in. So your civic health, I think, is probably great, and we'll run through some of the results of what we learned from this Civic Health Index. But we were able to survey over 2,500 students in grades 7 through 12 and give them a set of questions to understand the civic health of young people. And then Up for Learning brought together a focus group to the State House and gave the data back to these students and helped them reflect on whether that sounded like it was true. Does that ring true for you? Has that been your experience? And so it was really a great way to enrich that basic survey data. So this is one of my favorite slides in this presentation because when we got together with our partner organizations at the beginning, we asked them, what is civic health? And these are the various definitions of civic health. High level of trust in neighbors, institutions, and ourselves. Trust and belonging and ownership, and also the skills required to engage in constructive dialogue. Understanding how systems of power work in a community and what the levers for change are. I mean, that's so beautiful. Isn't that the point of living in a democracy, is knowing where the levers for change are and how to exercise them? When people in the community feel their systems work for them and they are reflected in those systems. And then NCOC defines civic health as the way communities are organized to define and address public problems. So I'm going to run through the different domains and just give you a little snapshot. If you look online at the full report, or if you read the executive summary, there's a little more information to flesh this out. But we'll run through the 6 domains, and I'll give you a little sampling of the national rankings and how Vermont looks. So we rank 5th in the country for informal helping, and 13th for formal volunteerism. Vermont ranks 2nd in the country for donations to political organizations, but when you look at the percentage of it, it's really only 15% of Vermonters that make donations to political organizations, a bit higher than the national average of 9%. Some of the trends in demographics for volunteering and donating. The blue bars all the way on the left shows you the breakdown in age, and all the way to the left of those blue bars, the tallest, the highest percentage of folks who volunteer are youth in grades 6 through 12, which makes a lot of sense because we have our kids involved in schools and sports and clubs, and that gives them lots of opportunities to volunteer and donate. And then you can see that in adulthood, the younger adults in the 30 to 44 range are the least apt to report that they get out there and volunteer and donate, probably because they're busy running their children to all of the sporting events and clubs that are helping them to get involved. So maybe they should get counted for that as well. But you see that with age, the opportunity to volunteer rises. The green bars in the center break this down by income level. So you'll see that folks who are making less than $35,000 a year are volunteer the least frequently, and folks making $75,000 or more are able to volunteer more frequently. And then the yellow bars are the results by educational attainment. So people with only a high school diploma are the least likely to be out there volunteering, some college, and then at least a bachelor's degree is the highest bar of folks who get out there and volunteer and donate. And I think that this is something, all of this demographic information is something to think about when we think about the organizations that need more energy and volunteerism, and how could they find ways to reach into some of these underrepresented demographics and make it easier for someone who's maybe working 2 part-time jobs to figure out how to serve on a community board, or make sure that we're communicating around the table of a nonprofit in a way that someone who doesn't have a bachelor's degree would also feel comfortable volunteering and being a part of that organization. So the next domain is political engagement. Our tradition of town meeting and local government being direct democracy probably contributes to why we see Vermont ranking 2nd in the country for attending public meetings. But still, look at the percentage. We only have 17% of Vermonters who reported having gone to a public meeting, higher than the national average of 8.2%, but still pretty low. We also rank 2nd in the country for contacting a public official, but again, that's only 18.5%. And so I think that you're going to see this theme come through in a lot of the slides in the different domains, where we rank very high, 2, 3, 5 in the nation, but that the percentage is actually still pretty low. Which says to me, we've got a lot of room for improvement. We've got a lot of room to figure out why it is that, 80% of Vermonters can't or don't attend a public meeting. Our voter turnout trends are an important thing to consider when we think about political engagement. If the blue line across the top is voter turnout in presidential election years, and the green line underneath is the midterm elections, people tend to come out to vote more frequently during those really intense presidential election periods, less frequently in the midterm elections. And if we were to plot 2024 out here on the blue line, it would be roughly equal with where we were in 2020, showing a consistent, around 70% voter turnout in the presidential years. It was important to me to understand how youth think about voting into the future, and so this was an interesting question and slightly unsettling. The question is, when you become eligible, do you intend to register to vote? So the green is yes, and the blue is no. Yeah, wow, that was how I felt. So that's what, 36%? I don't have my glasses. That's a pretty high percentage of young people who reported that they don't intend to register to vote. Thankfully, we have automatic voter registration at the motor vehicle department, so maybe some of these kids will get registered anyway without realizing that they could have opted out. So we'd like them to get involved. So social and community context is the next domain. Vermont ranks second in the country, again, for working with neighbors to do something positive for the neighborhood or community. And that's 31% of Vermonters who report doing that, compared to 18% nationally. I think we've had this exercised a lot in recent years with the 2023 floods and the 2024 floods, where people are really having to come out and band together to clean up or fix something that was destroyed in the floods. And we know that if it's still only 30% of Vermonters who are doing that, we've got a lot more people out there who we might be able to get involved in improving their communities. We also rank second in the country for discussing political, societal, or local issues with neighbors. And we don't know what kind of discussions those are when we look at this data. But I think we can all imagine that there's probably some work that we could all do to do a better job of talking to people who have different opinions than ours, different political opinions. It's much easier to talk with someone who agrees with you, but when divisiveness is everywhere around us, learning how to have those face-to-face conversations with people who think differently than we do is an important civic health skill. A little more on social and community context, some trends over time. So between 2013 and 2020, the percentage of Vermonters reporting never feeling uncomfortable or out of place in their community because of ethnicity, culture, race, skin color, language, accent, gender, sexual orientation, or religion increased from 62% back in 2013 to 78% in 2020, which at first blush feels like a real victory, right? Like that is a market improvement in people reporting that they do not feel uncomfortable because of these considerations. But that means that 22% of Vermonters in 2020 reported that they still do feel uncomfortable because of those differences. And it's clear that that is too high. That's a lot of our neighbors who feel uncomfortable. And what occurs to me when I look at this is, I think if the question was asked, do you ever feel uncomfortable or out of place because of your perceived social class relative to the other people, or because of your educational level relative to the people who are in your community, do you ever feel out of place? I think that number would be much higher. And it's something that we really need to consider. How do we make sure that we are making connections with our neighbors who don't have the level of education that we do, or don't have the level of income that we do? These are our neighbors who also need to feel civically connected. All right, in the past 12 months, this is another report from the youth survey, okay? So we're back to looking at our young people. In the past 12 months, how often did you talk to or spend time with people from a different racial, ethnic, or cultural background? And the blue part of the pie is at least once a month, and the green part of the pie is less frequently or not at all. And I think if you compared that to what adults might report, you can probably attribute that relatively strong percentage to our public school system, where all kids are coming together in a classroom, and young people have more opportunity to engage with people who are different than they are. And to me, it seems like an opportunity for us to consider whether we have, as adults, have enough opportunity to interact with someone from a different racial, ethnic, or cultural background. Cultural access and engagement. So this was an important part of looking at civic health. In 2021, nearly twice as many Vermonters reported belonging to any type of civic, religious, or otherwise group or organization than the U.S. population overall. So 33% of Vermonters reported being part of some sort of group, as opposed to 17% nationally. And 70% of Vermont youth in public school reported an affiliation with a group or organization in their community, compared with 33% of adults. So again, the questions that we should ask ourselves is, are there enough opportunities for adults to make these connections in our communities? In 2024, the Vermonter poll, 93% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that opportunities to view and participate in arts and culture are an important part of thriving and healthy communities. I just love that, because where else in the world can you get 93% of people to agree on something, right? So arts and culture are important, and yet Vermonters saw a decrease in satisfaction with access to artistic, cultural, and recreation and learning opportunities between 2017 and 2020, probably because of the pandemic. I don't know about you, but I can think of a number of gathering places or clubs or organizations or annual festivals that used to happen that just never came back after the pandemic. And so we have a hole in our communities, and I think it's time to start thinking about how we plug that hole. Media trust and access, right? How do you get your information, and how do you feel about that information that you're getting? Vermont ranks second in the number of people who report they frequently read, watch, or listen to news or information about political, societal, or local issues. And I can agree that probably 78.9% of Vermonters watch the local news, because every time I go to the grocery store, somebody walks up to me and says, "I saw you on WCAX. You're doing such a great job." Vermonters seek out national and local news sources at about the same rates for issues that are important to them, which I think is great, because we need to support our local news outlets. Our eyeballs on them is what helps them to thrive as news organizations. And so it's great that Vermonters are keeping tabs on their local news, and it helps us to be more informed about what's happening in our government. How are we doing for time? Oh, good. We're right on time. All right, this is back to the youth survey. And the pie chart on the left is, in the past 12 months, how often did you post your views about political, societal, or local issues on the internet or on social media? And what's interesting here is, I think a lot of us have a perception that kids are always on their phones, and that they're always, just giving all of their, giving their opinions and information out through social media. But 72% of respondents said that they never share posts about political or societal issues on social media. And the question on the right, in the past 12 months, how often did you read, watch, or listen to news or information about political, societal, or local issues? And the nice teal-colored 54% there is multiple times a month. So what we learned from this is that while the perception might be that kids are pushing out and sharing information on social media, actually what the students told us is that they receive information that way, but that they don't push it out because they don't know whether it's been fact-checked, whether it's been verified, whether it is from a trusted source, and so they just don't share it, which I think is a fascinating thing to hear about young people in our state, and probably a good and hopeful thing. So this is an interesting slide, and I'm sorry, those letters are probably so small that it's hard for you to see them. So the top line is the percentage of Vermonters with no confidence in national government. So in 2013, 30% of Vermonters said they have no confidence in our national government, and that improved to 51% or it grew to 51% in 2020. I don't think that's an improvement. The center question there is the percentage of Vermonters who have no confidence in their local government. And that has remained relatively flat, 9%, 9%, and then 7%. And the percentage of Vermonters who agreed that corruption is widespread throughout government in my community, so that's your local government. And you can see that 19% in 2013 said that they thought corruption was widespread in their local community, and that declined to 12% in 2020. It's an interesting contrast to see the faith that people report in their national government versus their state government versus their local government. So what's next? Now that we've completed the Civic Health Index, and I've run you through just a quick overview of the different domains, I hope you will take a look at the executive summary and also go to our website to pull down a copy of the whole report. There's a lot more information in there that I think you would find really fascinating. But we are seeing this really as the starting point, not the ending point. You know, this is not, we didn't do this because we wanted to, you know, check off a box and then put the report on a shelf and go on to do the next thing. We are looking at this as, number one, right now, an engagement tool. So we have been having these kinds of meetings across the state. I think you guys are the largest group that we've done Civic Health Index presentation in front of, so thank you. Pat yourselves on the back. Good job. We want to get out, though, and hear from folks about their responses to what we've just presented. So in the last few minutes when we have time for Q&A, I hope you'll ask questions or give us your opinion about what resonated with you, what sounded like you agree, what things maybe do you disagree with about what you heard in the Civic Health Index presentation. We want to try to develop a civic engagement coalition. How can we help communities where civic engagement is lower learn from communities where there's really good and robust engagement of the citizens? This is especially important when we look at the kinds of skills that are necessary within a community to help come back after a devastating flood. Now, our office is in downtown Montpelier. We had 4 feet of water surrounding our building. Our building was an island. In July of 2023. The entire downtown was shut down. There was mounds and mounds of destroyed furniture and wallboard and flooring, just lining the streets of Montpelier for months after the flood. But Montpelier had an organization that was very quick to come together and start organizing volunteers to come and help homeowners clean out and help businesses get cleaned out and set up again. Contrast that with Barry, just a few miles down the road, who didn't have that organization to come and very quickly get people who wanted to help engaged with people who needed help. And there was a huge difference between the amount of time it took for homeowners and for businesses in Barry to bounce back relative to Montpelier. And so we want to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to help folks learn from each other and to do a better job of connecting and coming together to solve problems. Supporting volunteerism efforts in Vermont, you know, people want to help. Let's see if we can support getting folks out there to volunteer. Improving access to civic spaces is another thing that we hear. People want to have places where they can gather. Expanding civics education. We did this presentation in Rutland the other night, and there was a woman who stayed after and talked to us for several minutes because she was so passionate about this idea of getting her school district to do more in the way of civics education. So we've even had some great follow-ups with her since we met her the other night. In the last thing that we're hearing from folks about what we should do next is really think about investing in arts and culture. That is one of those missing pieces that people have really mourned the loss of during and after COVID. So getting out there with more access to arts and culture in our communities is important to people. And so that's the end of my presentation. And when we usually finish this overview, we ask the general question: what does civic health look like in your community? So if you have a question, ask me a question. We've got a microphone here. But if you don't have a question, feel free to share your observations about the presentation as a whole, or your answer to the question of what does civic health look like in your community.
Fabulous. You're so good.
Yes, that was an excellent presentation. I'm too close.
That's perfect.
Okay. I volunteer at Mercy Connections, and I'm teaching civics in an immigration class. But I'm also a newcomer to Vermont. I'm a masshole, so I got a lot to learn.
We still love you.
Yep, thank you. I feel the love. I don't know if anybody else in the audience would also be interested in this, but I would love to get those slides to give to the person that's teaching the leadership and civics class at Mercy Connections. So if you have any way we can get a hold of those slides.
Let's connect afterward. You can grab me or Robin or Brian, and we can get an email connection so that we can talk about that.
And one more quick thing. I went to a movie yesterday called Join or Die.
Oh.
Did you ever hear of it? And have you ever heard of Bob Palmer? He wrote the book Bowling Alone, and all his data and everything that he's been working on for 50 years answers just that question, and it's a fascinating resource. You would
Bowling Alone.
Bowling
Okay.
Alone is the book.
Robin, we have to add that to our civics library.
And the movie is called Join or
Join
Die,
or Die,
where people are not joining civic organizations and other organizations, and they have been able to measure what that is in different communities.
and how that impacts
So it's
people.
right up your alley.
I love it. Thank you.
A question over here.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So in your role as the Secretary of State, you're part of the organization, the National Organization of Secretary of States. And it's my understanding that even though states vary a lot in terms of the way that they oversee elections, in most states, the majority of states, it comes under the direction and guidance of the Secretary of State. It seems to me there would be a valuable activity for the Association of Secretary of States to create something like model standards for voting integrity and access, which then states could adopt. And maybe that would increase the public's confidence in both access to voting rights and also integrity of voting.
Wow. Now that is, how much time do we have? Because we could talk about this for a long time. You're not wrong at all about that. It would be great if we had a national standard or best practices for making sure that people can engage and participate in a democracy. That's the whole point of living in a democracy, is that each of us gets to express our thoughts and our values through the ballot box. The wide variety of opinions about the value of high participation versus the need to make sure that those people, the wrong people, aren't voting, leaves it very difficult for a nonpartisan organization to come together and agree on anything such as standards on access to the ballot. There are a lot of myths out there about elections being unsecure, about election fraud being rampant, about non-citizens voting. The reality when you look at the data is that the number of fraudulently cast ballots or the number of ineligible people who vote is very, 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 very low. Contrast that with the number of people who are denied the ability to vote because when they returned their ballot by mail in a state that requires a signature verification, they were standing when they signed their ballot, and it looks different when you're standing and writing versus when you're sitting and writing. Or your signature that's on file with your county election official in a state that requires signature matching was your signature from when you were in your 30s. And now you're in your 70s, and your handwriting looks different. And now it doesn't match. And ballots can routinely be discounted, and people can be disenfranchised because of these kinds of issues. And so it's really hard for a nonpartisan organization that is made up of people who believe election fraud is rampant, and therefore we must do all of these things to make it harder for people to vote. It's very hard to come up with an aspirational statement about these are the best practices that we should use. I'm very proud of what Vermont has done because Vermont prioritizes access while still paying very, very close attention to election security. But we want to make sure that we are not using election security as a way of denying your right to vote. Thank you. Who's next? I'm going to let you all wave to them because they have the microphones. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering, have you been able to measure the knowledge of high schoolers of the structure and function of their local, state, and national governments? Because I seem to see a lot of people just don't have a clue how it all works in terms of government. And I think a strong high school education is really important to that.
I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, the fact that high school kids now don't have access to a basic civics curriculum because it is no longer required is part of the reason why they don't have an understanding of how the levers of power work. But that has been compounded because we have seen a decline in civics education for decades in this country. And if you think about it, it's a lot easier to govern people who don't know where the levers of power are. So I wonder in whose interest it was to stop teaching civics.
Acknowledging it or not, the bill will move education policy significantly in the direction over time of what rich people prefer, and it will be less democratic. And if we want to do that, that's one thing. But what frustrates me is I don't even think people are thinking about it, talking about it.
Right. Yeah, so my response to that is really that I believe in part that was not the income level of school board members being required to be higher in order to get elected to one of these larger districts, but really sort of the professionalizing of a school board, because in the governor's proposal, he was actually talking about making sure that we are compensating these board members in a way that many folks who are serving on our local boards now, you might get a little stipend that, might amount to, 5 cents an hour over the course of the year, but it's not really being paid to do that. So in many ways, in order to be able to serve on a local school board even now, you have to have, a source of income that is adequate to allow you the time to take those hours and serve on a board. So people who are working hourly wage jobs are much less likely to be able to serve on a local board. So, there are a lot of things that we can do as a state if we value having economic diversity among our elected officials. We can publicly finance campaigns so that once you qualify as a candidate, you get a certain amount of money that you can use to help finance your campaign. We can make sure that we are leveling the playing field in other ways to make it easier for people to run and serve on these boards. I think making the districts for the wards within the school districts as compact as possible is another way to make it easier for people to serve. We've suggested to the legislature that they make sure that when they make these larger school districts, that they require the school board to meet at different school buildings within the district so that you as a citizen, if you're not serving on the board, can attend a meeting once in a while, and so that each of the school board members has an opportunity to travel a shorter distance for one of their regular meetings. So it's something that certainly needs to be considered when we're looking at this. But it may be a while before the legislature gets deep enough in that they're thinking about that granular level of how we reorganize. Yes. Yeah.
This was a wonderful presentation. How does a person participate in the survey?
Oh, excellent. So the data that went into presenting these results to you, I should have said this at the beginning, is data that comes from the United States supplemental census data. So after they do the basic census, then they take a sampling and come out and do a series of questions with people sort of on a deeper level. And so that's where the bulk of this information comes from. And it's part of the reason why we wanted to dig deeper and partner with other organizations who have other data, because we know that our population is so small that sometimes when you look statistically across our teeny tiny population, maybe it's not a perfect representative sample of Vermonters. And so we know that in the next round, we need to figure out those ways of getting more information about those places that the supplemental census data didn't illuminate.
This has been, wait, I'm having microphone issues. Thank you so much. This was terrific.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely terrific.